Welcome to Midnight Whispers. Tonight we walk among headstones and hollow names. The grass is wet. The wind whispers through iron gates. Some graves sigh when no one listens. Some never learn to stay closed. Footsteps trail you but no one is there. A bell that should be rusted rings. Cold breath curls from a mouth you cannot see. Shadows lean closer, hungry for a heartbeat. Stories rise from the dirt, clawing at the dark. They will follow you home. They will wait at your door. If you keep watching, they might let you leave. If you stop, they won't. Story number 1. I moved back to Cresson County because no one else would empty out my mother's house. And because the bank was circling it like a vulture. Our town is a low, sagging fold in the Allegheny foothills where fog holds the hollows longer than it should, and the trains slow down even when they are trying not to. The cemetery sits on a ridge at the dead center of town. An old Episcopalian plot fenced in with flaking iron and a gate shaped like a harp. A bell hangs in its own wooden belfry just beyond the gate. People call it the grave bell, like it is a person, old and watchful. There used to be a rope so the caretaker could ring it during burials or storms. But the rope was cut around 1907, when safety coffins went out of fashion, and the last family that insisted on them died off. That is what we learned in 4th grade on a field trip. When I was a kid, the bell never made a sound. When I came home at 36, it rang every night at 12:03. The first night I thought it was a passing car or the freight line. I woke to the single tone and a second faint vibration that trembled the glass of my mother's bedroom window. The digital clock read 12:03 in sick green. The house settled like it always had, with a dry sigh at the joints, and the oak out front ticked its twigs against the gutter. Then I heard it again. One long iron note as clean as a spoon against crystal, then a whisper that seemed to settle back into the bed frame. I lay there awake until the birds started at 4. The next day I blamed jet lag and grief. Second night, 12:03, it rang again. On the third night I got up, put on boots, and walked the 2 blocks up the low hill to St. Luke's. The grass held the day's damp. The gravel path hummed under my steps. At the top, the belfry silhouette stuck up like a gallows without its rope, a shape you cannot comfort yourself with. It is either used or waiting. The moon was thinned to a hooked bone. I stood outside the gate with my hands in my jacket and waited. The town around me had gone to sleep with a final clatter from the diner's dumpster, and then nothing. A dog once, a far truck on Route 22, that was it. At 12:03, the bell tolled with no hand on it, no rope, no wind. Just one note, struck from inside the metal as if something had thrown its weight against it from within. I heard a second sound that time. At first it was easy to write off as the trees, but there were no leaves left to rub. It was November, a cold one. A black frost on the field stones. The sound came from below the bell, below the ground, a dry skitter like nails on wood. It trailed along the base of the belfry and down toward the oldest section where the dates were eaten by lichen. I stood very still and it stopped. A full minute went by, the kind of minute that grows like a shadow while you listen to your own blood. Then a voice spoke. It was not even a word. It was a sound forced through a pipe that did not want sound, hoarse and constricted. A human throat pressed against the wrong device. E. Then a wet breath. Then letters. S-T-A-N. The letters came like a child spelling slowly under a teacher's hand. There was a pause as if someone were remembering how to do it. Then L-E-Y Stanley. I knew 3 Stanleys in town. Stanley Burkett from shop class. His father, old Stanley, who still pumped gas at the one station that refused to die. And a boy named Stanislaw, whose mother had moved away after he was arrested for copper theft. I did not know which it meant. It felt like the name came out of the ground. It felt like it was being pushed through a pipe that had been buried a long time. I went home and sat on the edge of the bed with the lamp on and told myself it was a coyote with a throat full of ticks. At 7 a.m., my phone lit with a message from a number I did not recognize. The old man at the gas station had been found on the concrete with his hand under a tire. Too cold for blood to do much. He had come out to close up and slipped. The boy from the morning news who stopped for cigarettes and found him was crying in the background of the call. Someone tagged me because I had grown up with the family. 2 days later, the paper wrote heart failure. He was 89. Everyone said a soft, sad thing and went back to eggs and toast. The bell rang again the next night. Same time, the same single note. More scratching, which I pretended not to hear as I stood by the gate with my hands in my jacket. The cold setting its teeth into my knuckles. The voice dragged itself through the pipe with an aching insistence. It spelled C-H-A-R-L-E-N-E Charlene. There was only one Charlene I knew. She ran the diner where we all learned to lie politely. She had a laugh that broke into coughs. The next day she did not open. Her daughter came to the door with an apron still around her waist and said through the screen that Charlene had gone to the hospital in the night. And then she said something else but left out the verb in a way that made every word sound like a sliver. The funeral came and went in 4 days. The bell kept ringing. No one talked about the hour. By then I had met the new caretaker. His name was Raymond Bledsoe, and he lived in the 1-story brick house that you can see from the road, painted the color of stale mayonnaise, with a chain-link fence that made no sense. He was in his 50s with a painful mustache that looked like a dusting of iron filings. He had the exhausted face of a man who has learned the exact weight of all his chores. On the day after Charlene died, I went to the cemetery in the afternoon and found him on a low stool painting the names back into a weathered marble with a small brush. He held one bristle between 2 fingers and breathed through his teeth as he traced the hollowed letters. "I heard the bell last night," I said. "I hear it every night," he said, not looking up. "You want to rake something, rake the leaves from the north fence and make my day better." "There's no rope," I said. I felt ridiculous as soon as I said it. I had nothing better. He set the brush down on the blank headstone beside him and looked at me like I had delivered the punchline late. "And yet it rings," he said. "It is not a church bell. It is not a clock. It is not a train. It is the only bell out here, and it rings when it wants. You want to pretend it doesn't, you go ahead. I tried that for years. I'd be grateful if you brought that rake back when you're done. I raked leaves because there is a power in having something to do while your brain tries not to reassemble itself around the thing it does not want." We worked without talking until the light went thin and dull. When I brought the rake back, he was kneeling by a grave. Not the one he had been painting, but one of the oldest. A flat stone with no name left. Only the year 1899, which he was brushing with a whisk. Beside it was a corroded copper pipe, the width of a man's thumb, that ran into the ground and out again, up the slope toward the bell. It had a slotted cap on it with a hinge like a locket. "Safety coffin kit," he said. "We keep finding them. Families bought the package with the bell and the pipe, and a little window sometimes, and a crank you could turn if you woke up and found yourself under a foot of dirt. People were scared of cholera. They were scared of 2 sleepy doctors. They were scared of the long winter and what it can do to a pulse." He tapped the pipe and it made a muffled ring. A lot of the pipes went to the bell, not all. Some went to small rattles, no bigger than a pistol trigger. "This one goes to the bell." So did Charlene's grandparents and the Burketts. The kits were sold by mail. We find the ads in attics sometimes. "So it is possible," I said, "for sound to come from the ground." "It's possible," he said, "for sound to come from a box with a man or woman in it who wants very much to ring the bell. It is possible for sound to come from mice too, or from nothing that ever had an address. That is a lot of possibility for one person to manage." "Do you hear it spell names?" I said. It came out more bluntly than I meant. Ray's mouth tightened. He brushed the edge of the pipe cap with his thumb. "Sometimes," he said. "The dead are not always the ones who want a name put in order. I had a wife once who begged me to move us to Florida. I told her I was a caretaker and caretakers do not move. 2 years later she did without me. The bell rang the night before she left. It spelled my name as if I needed help remembering it. "You dug up a grave," I said. It felt more like a guess than a question. He looked at me like he was gauging whether I could carry a brick across a creek without slipping. "Once," he said, "I dug a new burial we had put down that afternoon because I heard the bell at 3 minutes past midnight, like always, and then I heard scraping. It sounded like someone trying to scratch through a violin. I got the backhoe because there is no ceremony when you believe there is air running out. I told myself the rules were for people who were sure, and I was not sure, so I did what a not sure man does. Dirt jumps when you do that. It comes up like it thinks it is free. I lifted the lid with a crowbar. It was a woman in her 80s. Her hands were folded like I had put them, but her fingernails were torn and full of wood. She had blood on her lips that had no business being there. The family sued me for desecration, and then withdrew the complaint after the coroner picked a new time to put on the certificate. He said she bled because blood moves after you stop if someone moves you. He said air convects enough in a coffin to make a person give you a show. I said fine. Then I put her back like I found her. That was the last time I dug because of the bell. You do it once and you learn a thing you cannot farm. I carried that story around like a viper in a pillowcase. I tried to sleep without thinking of the sound of nails on a coffin lid. The more I tried not to, the closer I listened. The bell rang at 12:03 with the idiot certainty of a heartbeat. 2 nights after Ray told me his story, the bell tolled in the letter voice spelled Arthur. There was only one Arthur I knew, my mother's brother who lived down in Johnstown and drank like it was a job no one else had filled. I called him 5 times. He answered once on the 5th, thick-tongued, cheerful, and furious about a bet. He told me I was still a boy and I told him about the bell. He hung up with a soft click that only comes from old landlines. He did not die. He called me 2 days later and asked about my mother's china, and acted as if nothing had happened. The bell did not say his name again. That was the first time the bell said a name that did not end in a funeral. It should have calmed me. It didn't. It meant the bell is not a list made by God. It can be wrong. It can be your friend, or it can be a prankster, or it can be a cruel game with rules that change to keep you playing. The following night it spelled Marlene, that was the woman across the street from my mother's house who fed feral cats and repainted her mailbox every June. She waved when I brought the trash to the curb. I stood in the dark at the foot of my own steps and listened to a voice that had to climb a long piece of pipe. The next morning there were ambulance lights on our street as sharp as broken candy, and men in blue carrying equipment through her door. I watched them load no one and drive away with the lights still turning. I went inside and found her daughter in the kitchen with a dish towel in her hands and her cheeks hot with the kind of anger that is only grief. She told me her mother had died in the night a little after midnight, alone, quiet, with no one to hear if she wanted bells. I started writing down the names. I started carrying my mother's little notepad with the pharmacy's logo and a pencil with half an eraser, and making lists under the bedside lamp while the bell shook the room. I wrote the time and the weather and what the wind did with the big oak. I wrote how far off the trains were. I recorded the bell on my phone. There is a way desperation can organize a person who has never been able to organize anything. The list did nothing but make me sicker with alertness. When the bell skipped a name for 2 nights and then gave 3 at once like a teacher catching up, I threw the pad across the room and sat in the corner of the bed and pressed my thumbs into my eyes until I saw sparks. I told myself it did not matter what I heard. I told myself we make patterns because our heads are pattern machines. Then I woke from a shallow pad of sleep and found I had walked to the window in my underwear at midnight with my hands on the sill waiting for the sound. My job in town was whatever would buy butter and electricity while I boxed up 50 years of brown glass and paper. I cut firewood for a cousin. I hauled garbage. On a Tuesday, I scrubbed the diner's flat top because the girl who should have done it could not lift her newborn without closing her eyes. 2 days later, I helped Ray put up a sheet of plywood where a winter storm had torn out a fence section along the north edge. We worked in cold light while he told me all the ways people die in their houses when the temperature changes. He talked like a man who had learned to get ahead of facts by saying them before they could hurt him. I asked him if the bell ever spelled his name again. He said no, and something about the way he said it told me he had not been all the way asleep since it happened. I realize now that I was making myself available. That is the only way I can say it. I was there. I was awake when no one else was awake. I had made the cemetery my calendar. When you stand where something wants attention, you are no longer a bystander. You are moving into the field of whatever passes for choice in a thing like that, and the thing notices. I wish I were making this larger and not smaller. I am trimming away everything that is not bone. On a Sunday during the first hard freeze, the bell tolled and the pipe voice spelled my name. It spelled it carefully, voice scraping the sides of the copper, taking time with each letter like someone pronouncing a foreign word. Daniel, then my last name. It did not rush. I kept thinking the voice would break into a cough and stop. It did not. I stood at the window with my hand on the sill and the other on my diaphragm like a lifeguard about to jump into water too cold to forgive mistakes. When it finished, I expected to drop. Nothing in me did. I was still breathing. I stood there and kept breathing for an hour in the mustard light of the clock. I did not sleep. I put on boots at 4 and went out to the cemetery before the sun got any ideas. Ray was already out, blowing his hands into a cup against the damp. He looked at me like he had been waiting for me to come tell him what he already knew. I said it anyway. He nodded once and jerked his chin toward the old section. We walked there without talking. He stopped at a narrow grave topped by a long slab of limestone. No name left, only a hand pointing upward carved on one end, and patted it like you would an animal that had learned a small trick. Then he stepped over to the copper pipe and put his ear to the slotted cap and closed his eyes. He stayed like that for a long 10 seconds. Then he straightened and looked at me. His eyes were a tired, flat gray. "You hear it once," he said. "And it is a thing to tell your neighbor. You hear it with your own name and you burn the phone numbers in your wallet. There is a shovel in the truck bed." "I am not digging," I said. "I am not climbing down with no reason. I am not losing my mind because of a pipe. There is no reason. The reasons do not volunteer," he said. "You use the shovel because the reasons want to stay right where they are. You use the shovel because you do not want what is going to happen with you laying still. You feel better when you are moving. Moving makes the exact same amount of difference as being still, but it feels better." We dug. The ground held like it had something to prove. Frost is a personality. It resists, then yields, then resists, and it makes you feel like you are the rude one. We took turns and moved through the first foot, then 2, grunting steam. At 3 feet, the shovel rang against something narrow and metal. Ray knelt and cleared the dirt with his hands like a dog. He uncovered a vertical tube that ran down into the dark. The same copper as the pipe on the surface, with couplings greened like old coins. He tapped it and we both listened. It sounded like a throat being cleared after a long sleep. "This one ties to the bell," he said. "You can follow it with your hand if you want to get acquainted." "I do not," I said. I was not joking. We reached wood at 4 feet, a plank that had been laid like a lid over a narrow trench, the old practice for cheap burials. Ray brushed it off and showed me staples where the cord used to thread. "It went to the person's wrist," he said. "Or finger. Folks like to be precise, so they could pull, and the bell would ring and the caretaker would come running. Except the caretaker drinks or sleeps, or the frost heaves the line and throws a ring at the wrong time. People get embarrassed when they see a man break the ground for nothing. So they cut ropes and call it progress. Now and then someone falls asleep with the wrong life in him and wakes up in the box and pulls and there is no one to hear. I told myself once I would never let that be true again. I told myself a lot of things. "What happens if I ring it?" I said, and it felt like I was asking something indecent. "You will make a sound a long way from where you are," he said. "There is no guarantee about who hears it. I did not ring it." I climbed out of the hole with mud on my knees and went home and did a stupid thing. I unplugged every clock. I took the battery out of my phone. I put the cordless landline, which I still had because my mother had never gotten rid of it, in the oven. Then I went into the basement and lay on the concrete and tried to put my palm into the cold until the cold took something out of me that was bigger than what the bell had put in. I stayed there until I heard the bell at 12:03 like a note struck inside my own mouth. I went outside with no coat and followed the sound up the street. My breath made a visible noise in the air. The town was off. No porch lights, no cattle lowing from the hill, no car radios. The silence was shared, which made it worse. The gate was ajar at St. Luke's, not by much, just enough to suggest a welcome that would be rude to ignore. I walked in and felt the small electric shock along my wrists that I get from standing too close to transformers. The bell was dark and heavy above me. I put my palm against the wooden post. It was warm. The pipe under my hand hummed. Then the voice came up. Letters punched through a throat that had never wanted to spell. D-A-N-I-E-L-B-E-L-L. That last letter stuttered as if it had hit its own sound and bounced. I answered it like a lunatic answers a steam radiator. "I am here," I said. "I hear you." The letter stopped. Something knocked against the inside of the bell. Not the outside. The inside. Not big, but deliberate. A knuckle on a bowl. Then the scraping started along the ground to my right. Under the oldest stones where the names were more notch than letter. I stood without moving and let it come. It moved like a thing that knows about you. When the scraping reached my boots, it stopped. The ground under me rose and fell once, not much, like the contents of a chest. When it settled again, there was a small sound, like a finger against a metal button. I knew the gesture without having learned it. It was the light touch a person would use for a doorbell. Half hopeful, half embarrassed to bother anybody. The bell overhead did not ring. I dug with my hands. It was not a decision. It was not noble. It was compulsion with the taste of rust in it. I scraped the turf back from the corner of a flat stone and found the capped pipe that Ray had listened to. I put my ear to it and heard nothing. I unscrewed the cap without thinking of who might be watching. Cold, wet air lifted out of the pipe and into my face. It smelled like wood and stone and a tooth someone else had lost. Then a breath rose and touched my cheek as if a person had put 2 fingers there. I put my mouth to the pipe. "Who?" I said. The answer came as a sigh and the faintest suggestion of 2 syllables. "Come down." The phrase is nonsense when applied to a grave. It is not stairs. It is not a cellar. It is not a ladder a man can bring up. Yet that is what I heard, and the logic of it wrapped itself around my spine. I stood up, took 2 steps to the right where the ground was slightly lower, and felt the earth give with the care of a trap you only built for yourself. The turf hinged. It did not break. It simply shifted aside on an axis that had been designed into it a long time ago. Under it was a wooden rectangle with a cutout and a small brass handle that had been painted over until it looked like a root. I reached for it. I will spend the rest of time wishing I had not. The door came up with a wet suction sound and a ragged complaint from wood that had considered itself retired. There were 3 steps cut into clay. A glow rose that was not electricity and not fire, but the reflection of light somewhere else. It made the inside of the door look oiled. I went down. Each step felt like putting my foot through water. The air pressed my shirt to my back. The space under the door was not a pit. It was a corridor, narrow as a sewing box, braced with timbers that had gone sweet with rot and iron braces that had drifted into the color of old blood. On either side, at shin height, ran the copper pipe. The corridor tilted downward, then leveled. I walked with my palm along the wood where beetles had written in a language that lacked verbs. I did not run because I had no place to run to. The bell rang above me like a punctuation mark. The voice spoke once more from ahead, not in letters now, but in a weary syllable that had share in both welcome and warning. Here. The corridor widened into a chamber. The light came from the single chimney of a storm lantern on a shelf. It should not have been lit. It was lit. The chamber had been cut into the ground around what looked like a coffin set on 2 trestles, but not like any coffin I had seen at St. Luke's. It was narrow and high, with a small glass pane in the lid at the level of a face. The pane was fogged with the moisture of breath and wiped clean again with the insistence of someone who had run out of patience for windows. The copper pipe ran to a small lever bolted to the inside. The lever's arm passed through a slot. It had a leather loop for a wrist. Dark scuffs marked the wood where a hand had hammered. There were letters carved into the edge of the lid by a knife tip. They were mine. A second coffin stood behind it, lid closed, dusty with no glass. A third leaned against the wall at an angle with the metal fitting still bright, as if it had been carried down yesterday. A cardboard box on the floor held bells the size of apples. Their tongues rang with dry ticks when the lantern drew the air. On the shelf beside the lantern were index cards written in a hand I recognized as Ray's, each card with a name and a date and a time. The times were always the same, 12:03. The dates extended back years. The top card had my name on it with today's date. I heard footsteps behind me. They were careful and unhurried. Ray came into the light, wiping his hands on a towel as if I had interrupted him at a sink. He looked at me with something like apology and something like relief, the way a man looks at a solution he hates but has run out of others to try. "I needed help," he said. "I have not slept in full dark in a decade. I told myself I would teach someone younger how to keep the list, how to listen and how to ignore and when the difference matters. I thought you were a good man for it. You were awake when it is hard to be. You came when the bell called like you knew what job you were being interviewed for, and then the thing spelled your name and ruined the chance of a training that took more than a night. Why is my name on that card?" I said. My mouth had gone numb. My tongue did not feel like it was part of me. "Because it has to be," he said. "If you do not put the name where the name belongs, you find it written on the wall in chalk. You find it in your food. You find it in the mirror turned the wrong way. The names want to be written. They want a home before they take one. I give them that. It does not mean they get to keep what they want. Sometimes it buys a day. Sometimes it buys nothing. It buys me a sense that I am not a coward about the facts. That is nothing and it is everything." "Who is in that box?" I said. I knew the answer. I needed him to lie to me. He ran the towel along his forehead. "All of us in a way," he said. "But right now no one. Right now it is an empty show that brought you down here so I can show you the lever and the way the pipe carries the sound. Right now you can climb back up and go to your kitchen and pour coffee and tell yourself you had a dream I helped you out of. Or you can stay and see what the bell does when the wire is held by a wrist and not a wind. Either way, the time will be what it is. He stepped aside. I stepped closer to the coffin with the glass pane. The pane fogged again. The breath on it was warm. It wiped itself with a sudden angry efficiency from the inside. The skin on my arms drew tight. I leaned because my stupid body thought it should make a case to my brain that what I was seeing was not what I was seeing. A face leaned up from the dark under the glass and met mine. It was my face. It had a smear of soil along the cheek like a hand had tried to touch it and failed. Its eyes were open the way a person's eyes are open when the light is too far away to convince them. My face lifted until the glass bent against my nose and exhaled. The breath carried a smell like teeth ground down to sparks. I moved backward fast enough to take the lantern off the shelf. Ray caught it before it hit the ground. He set it back and his hand shook. "It is easier if you do not fight," he said. "You will not believe this now. You will try to find the stair without turning around. You will convince yourself this is a room you can pretend not to have found. But the bell is a habit, and habits are stronger than husbands. You hear it, you answer. You can stand in your own yard and you will still answer. You can move to Florida and it will find a palm tree to hang from like a replacement spine." "Who put that here?" I said. "I meant the whole room. I meant the pipe and the lever and the second coffin and the cards. I meant the design of this trap. I meant the idea that a bell is a door that opens down instead of up." He gave me the look a man gives a dog who has come to a stop at the edge of a highway and is looking right and left like he expects the cars to ask permission. "We did," he said. "We are careful, and then we are careless, and then we are careful again. We bury, and we promise, and we forget what we promised because our pockets are full of other noises. We build machines to keep a person from being alone under the ground, and then we stop winding them because the sound makes supper taste wrong. We give up on the devices when it is inconvenient to pretend they work. The devices do not care about our timing. They are run by hope for a while, and then by something else when hope goes to sleep." The face under the glass watched me like a patient watches a nurse who has the needle. It did not look like a mirror. It looked like a man who had lived all day in the dark and knew how to make himself flat to save air. It did not blink. My throat closed in such a way that swallowing hurt. I said the first stupid thing that made it past my teeth. "How long?" I said. Ray raised the towel to his mouth and kept it there a second before speaking. "The bell rings at 12:03, he said. "No matter what. It has done that for as long as anyone can stand to mark it. Sometimes something in the ground pulls the lever before the bell. Sometimes after. Sometimes not at all. People above ground die like they always died, which is to say the time can be graceful, or it can be a slap. This is different. This is about calling and being called. You can say no. You can say it twice. The third time the sentence is finished whether you help with the grammar or not. I do not have a clean reason that explains what I did then. I sat on the bench beside the coffin and put my hand through the slot to the lever. I felt the leather loop with my fingers. It was cracked and slick. It had the temperature of a living mouth. The metal of the lever bit into my palm. I felt the weakest suggestion of pressure from the other side, as if another hand were resting there waiting for mine, willing to pretend that both were the same. I pulled once to see what the bell would do. It rang like it always did. The sound fell back down the pipe and filled the space with a thickness that felt like hair. The face under the glass tried to speak and could not. It mouthed the shape of letters I expected to form my name again. It formed a different one. Raymond. Ray dropped the towel. His hand flickered toward his jaw. He made a noise like metal left in winter. The lantern grumbled at its little glass throat. For the first time since I came down, he looked like he understood something that could not be kept in a drawer. He put his hand on the coffin lid and leaned close to the glass and said very quietly, "I hear you." The breath under the pane fogged, cleared, fogged. The copper pipe jumped against the wall like a snake touched with a boot. The bell above us dropped a second note into the dirt. Not the clean iron of ritual, but a warped sound like a bent rim catching on the break. The pane spidered in one corner and held. For a moment there was no sound but the small bad breath of the lantern. Then the lever moved under my hand without my help. It moved with more force than any human hand inside the box could give. It yanked. The bell went off like a struck anvil. The pipe between my fingers thrummed. I felt the leather loop climb my wrist. I tried to pull away and the loop tugged back. The slot gave the lever enough play to make my fingers feel as if they had been caught in a record player. The pane in the lid cracked again. A line went across my other face and divided it into quadrants. My heart made a serious attempt at my ribs. "Do not pull," Ray said. "Do not pull. It will do the work if you let it. It wants your weight. It wants what you think of as help." "I am not helping," I said. "I am leaving." "You are repeating," he said. "That is different." I yanked my hand back hard. The leather loop came with it like something eager to be part of me. It caught on my watch and jammed, then slid free with a wet sound and a little piece of my skin. I did not feel the pain right then. I stood and stumbled into the shelf. An index card stuck to my sleeve. I peeled it off and saw my name again with a time written under it. Not 12:03, a minute later. 12:04. "What is that?" I said. I knew what it was. I needed him to lie. "The bell lies to me about the second thing," he said. "It always has. I write down the minute because the minute after is the one that breaks the heart. It is the one where the ring is done but the thing begins. People never die when the bell rings. They die in the part that follows." He sat down on the other bench. His hands were quiet in his lap. He looked like a man at the airport who has watched the departure board update 3 times and has put his bag down because his body cannot carry it any more convincingly without the pretense of a destination. He said, "If you want to tell me that we made this, I will agree. If you want to tell me that it is here whether we made it or not, I will agree. If you want to ask why we keep the room built and the lantern filled, I will say that people do not know what to do with the parts of their lives that will not stay upstairs. This is where they go. The bell makes a promise and unmakes it. That is what promises are for." I climbed the steps without knowing I had decided to. The door pushed up with less effort than it had taken to open. The cold hit me and made me feel as if the world had been boiled and then poured out. Stars had shown up while I was underground, and the sky looked like cold water moving under a sheet of glass. I stumbled home with dirt on my hands and knees and went into the kitchen and put them under the tap until the water ran clean. My other face rode behind my eyes like afterimage. At 12:04, the house gave a small lurch like a boat when someone steps from a dock to the deck. Something in the wall ticked. The power flickered and steadied. The oak outside ticked its twigs. Then, from 2 blocks away, the bell rang again, a short hitch of a note like a hiccup, and the sound came up through the pipes under the sink with the smell of wet coins. I did not die that night. I slept in folds of 20 minutes and woke sweating at 4 with the taste of copper in my mouth. The next day, the town looked the same in the way a face looks the same when the muscles are pretending to remember their job. I took the pad with the names and put it in the trash. I took it out again. I folded it into my pocket. In the afternoon, I stood at my mother's dresser and opened drawers I had no right to. There were 3 old newspaper clippings under her socks. Each told a version of the same story. Bell rings at midnight. Man dies for no reason and finds one. Family sues. Caretaker quits. New caretaker hired. I did not know if my mother had collected these because she had believed or because she had liked to be awful to herself in private. At 12:03 that night, the bell rang and spelled a name I did not know. The next day, there was a car accident on the highway. Another night, it spelled none. And the next morning, there was a fire in a trailer no one had tied into town. The rhythm became its own animal. I tried to go a night without listening. I put in earplugs from the hardware store and slept in a hat. The earplugs made the bell sound like it was inside my pillow. The hat made it feel like I had agreed to be blindfolded. On a Thursday, I went to St. Luke's with coffee just before midnight. Ray was in the gatehouse. He did not look surprised. He had that towel folded on the table like a priest folds a stole. He poured his coffee into a plant that had died in July and took mine without asking what was in it. The bell rang at 12:03 and the pipe voice spelled him. Raymond. His mouth did not move. He stared at the plant as if it would offer to switch places. "Now what?" I said. I did not know if I meant me or him or the factory of the bell. "You write it," he said. He looked tired down to the first word he had ever learned. "You write it on the card and you put the card in the box and then you go to the room and you sit on the bench when the minute turns and you hold the lever if you can stand to and you let go when you cannot. You listen because listening is a thing to do when doing in the usual sense is not left to you. I do not want to hold the lever," I said. "I do not want to make a sound that says I agree." "You agreed when you answered the first time," he said. "The rest is manners." I wrote his name on a card at his table. I could not make my hand stop shaking. He put his hand over mine once. It made it worse because it was an old comfort and old comforts belong to other problems. We walked to the old section in the cold that has no light in it, but the light of things that want their shapes. The door in the ground was closed again. He opened it with the practice of a man who has untied too many knots. We went down. The lantern was lit. He sat on one bench. I sat on the other. For the first time since I met him, he said a prayer. He did it quietly and without the expectation that anyone would take notes. The bell rang above like a gavel in a courthouse that had long ago lost jurisdiction. The lever moved. The leather made its case around my wrist. I thought of the tiny bells in the box and their dry tongues. I thought of the index, cards in the landfill, and the way the face under. The glass had my old soccer scar above the left brow because I am exactly as I am even when I am under the ground. Ray put his hand through the slot and held the lever first. He did not look at me. He watched the glass. He watched his own breath fog and clear and fog again. He rocked the lever gently as if he were coaxing a baby to sleep. The pipe sang. The bell answered in iron. The second coffin leaned in its corner. The spare one waited like a piece of furniture ordered to the wrong house. He looked at me once with an expression I will not try to name, and then he stood and stepped back and the leather circle slid from his wrist to mine like a tourniquet put on by someone who knows which veins hurt. He said, "You are the caretaker now." In the same tone a man tells another that the weather will be what it will be, and he climbed the steps without waiting for me to reply. I wanted to follow him. My hand would not come out of the slot. The lever had found the exact bone that belonged to it and cinched there. My breath fogged the glass. The face under it tried again to speak. It did not make my name. It made a sound that was older. It spoke the word that does not sound like anything until you do not have it. Air. The bell rang the way it always rings, and somewhere above it a second bell rang back, off time, like a delay. It took me 2 seconds to understand that the second was an echo in the pipe from another room that had been opened to make room for something else. I do not have a clean reason that explains what I did then. I sat on the bench beside the coffin and put my hand through the slot to the lever. I felt the leather loop with my fingers. It was cracked and slick. It had the temperature of a living mouth. The metal of the lever bit into my palm. I felt the weakest suggestion of pressure from the other side, as if another hand were resting there waiting for mine, willing to pretend that both were the same. I pulled once to see what the bell would do. It rang like it always did. The sound fell back down the pipe and filled the space with a thickness that felt like hair. The face under the glass tried to speak and could not. It mouthed the shape of letters I expected to form my name again. It formed a different one. Raymond. Ray dropped the towel. His hand flickered toward his jaw. He made a noise like metal left in winter. The lantern grumbled at its little glass throat. For the first time since I came down, he looked like he understood something that could not be kept in a drawer. He put his hand on the coffin lid and leaned close to the glass and said very quietly, "I hear you." The breath under the pane fogged, cleared, fogged. The copper pipe jumped against the wall like a snake touched with a boot. The bell above us dropped a second note into the dirt. Not the clean iron of ritual, but a warped sound like a bent rim catching on the break. The pane spidered in one corner and held. For a moment there was no sound but the small bad breath of the lantern. Then the lever moved under my hand without my help. It moved with more force than any human hand inside the box could give. It yanked. The bell went off like a struck anvil. The pipe between my fingers thrummed. I felt the leather loop climb my wrist. I tried to pull away and the loop tugged back. The slot gave the lever enough play to make my fingers feel as if they had been caught in a record player. The pane in the lid cracked again. A line went across my other face and divided it into quadrants. My heart made a serious attempt at my ribs. "Do not pull," Ray said. "Do not pull. It will do the work if you let it. It wants your weight. It wants what you think of as help." "I am not helping," I said. "I am leaving." "You are repeating," he said. "That is different." I yanked my hand back hard. The leather loop came with it like something eager to be part of me. It caught on my watch and jammed, then slid free with a wet sound and a little piece of my skin. I did not feel the pain right then. I stood and stumbled into the shelf. An index card stuck to my sleeve. I peeled it off and saw my name again with a time written under it. Not 12:03, a minute later. 12:04. "What is that?" I said. I knew what it was. I needed him to lie. "The bell lies to me about the second thing," he said. "It always has." I write down the minute because the minute after is the one that breaks the heart. It is the one where the ring is done but the thing begins. People never die when the bell rings. They die in the part that follows. He sat down on the other bench. His hands were quiet in his lap. He looked like a man at the airport who has watched the departure board update 3 times and has put his bag down because his body cannot carry it any more convincingly without the pretense of a destination. He said, "If you want to tell me that we made this, I will agree. If you want to tell me that it is here whether we made it or not, I will agree. If you want to ask why we keep the room built and the lantern filled, I will say that people do not know what to do with the parts of their lives that will not stay upstairs. This is where they go." The bell makes a promise and unmakes it. That is what promises are for. I climbed the steps without knowing I had decided to. The door pushed up with less effort than it had taken to open. The cold hit me and made me feel as if the world had been boiled and then poured out. Stars had shown up while I was underground, and the sky looked like cold water moving under a sheet of glass. I stumbled home with dirt on my hands and knees and went into the kitchen and put them under the tap until the water ran clean. My other face rode behind my eyes like afterimage. At 12:04, the house gave a small lurch like a boat when someone steps from a dock to the deck. Something in the wall ticked. The power flickered and steadied. The oak outside ticked its twigs. Then, from 2 blocks away, the bell rang again, a short hitch of a note like a hiccup, and the sound came up through the pipes under the sink with the smell of wet coins. I did not die that night. I slept in folds of 20 minutes and woke sweating at 4 with the taste of copper in my mouth. The next day, the town looked the same in the way a face looks the same when the muscles are pretending to remember their job. I took the pad with the names and put it in the trash. I took it out again. I folded it into my pocket. In the afternoon, I stood at my mother's dresser and opened drawers I had no right to. There were 3 old newspaper clippings under her socks. Each told a version of the same story. Bell rings at midnight. Man dies for no reason and finds one. Family sues. Caretaker quits. New caretaker hired. I did not know if my mother had collected these because she had believed or because she had liked to be awful to herself in private. At 12:03 that night, the bell rang and spelled a name I did not know. The next day, there was a car accident on the highway. Another night, it spelled none. And the next morning, there was a fire in a trailer no one had tied into town. The rhythm became its own animal. I tried to go a night without listening. I put in earplugs from the hardware store and slept in a hat. The earplugs made the bell sound like it was inside my pillow. The hat made it feel like I had agreed to be blindfolded. On a Thursday, I went to St. Luke's with coffee just before midnight. Ray was in the gatehouse. He did not look surprised. He had that towel folded on the table like a priest folds a stole. He poured his coffee into a plant that had died in July and took mine without asking what was in it. The bell rang at 12:03 and the pipe voice spelled him. Raymond. His mouth did not move. He stared at the plant as if it would offer to switch places. "Now what?" I said. I did not know if I meant me or him or the factory of the bell. "You write it," he said. He looked tired down to the first word he had ever learned. "You write it on the card and you put the card in the box and then you go to the room and you sit on the bench when the minute turns and you hold the lever if you can stand to and you let go when you cannot. You listen because listening is a thing to do when doing in the usual sense is not left to you. I do not want to hold the lever," I said. "I do not want to make a sound that says I agree." "You agreed when you answered the first time," he said. "The rest is manners." I wrote his name on a card at his table. I could not make my hand stop shaking. He put his hand over mine once. It made it worse because it was an old comfort and old comforts belong to other problems. We walked to the old section in the cold that has no light in it, but the light of things that want their shapes. The door in the ground was closed again. He opened it with the practice of a man who has untied too many knots. We went down. The lantern was lit. He sat on one bench. I sat on the other. For the first time since I met him, he said a prayer. He did it quietly and without the expectation that anyone would take notes. The bell rang above like a gavel in a courthouse that had long ago lost jurisdiction. The lever moved. The leather made its case around my wrist. I thought of the tiny bells in the box and their dry tongues. I thought of the index, cards in the landfill, and the way the face under. The glass had my old soccer scar above the left brow because I am exactly as I am even when I am under the ground. Ray put his hand through the slot and held the lever first. He did not look at me. He watched the glass. He watched his own breath fog and clear and fog again. He rocked the lever gently as if he were coaxing a baby to sleep. The pipe sang. The bell answered in iron. The second coffin leaned in its corner. The spare one waited like a piece of furniture ordered to the wrong house. He looked at me once with an expression I will not try to name, and then he stood and stepped back and the leather circle slid from his wrist to mine like a tourniquet put on by someone who knows which veins hurt. He said, "You are the caretaker now." In the same tone a man tells another that the weather will be what it will be, and he climbed the steps without waiting for me to reply. I wanted to follow him. My hand would not come out of the slot. The lever had found the exact bone that belonged to it and cinched there. My breath fogged the glass. The face under it tried again to speak. It did not make my name. It made a sound that was older. It spoke the word that does not sound like anything until you do not have it. Air. The bell rang the way it always rings, and somewhere above it a second bell rang back, off time, like a delay. It took me 2 seconds to understand that the second was an echo in the pipe from another room that had been opened to make room for something else. Story number 2. I grew up in a town that pretended the river cut it in half, when the truth was the river made it one piece. Both banks used the same diner, the same VFW hall, the same 2-lane that bent like a healing rib around the cemetery. If you drive out to the cemetery, you'll see the willow before you see the cross because that tree sits like a body at the front pew, shoulders hunched, hair down. The cross behind it is plain white oak bound in iron, a soldier's cross put there by the mothers in 1921 for boys who went to France and did not return. Someone carved the year they planted it into the wood, not deep enough to outlast the weather, and every decade a different hand goes out with a paintbrush and touches it back to life. The willow came later, or that is the version people like to tell. Old men at the counter say the willow grew from a switch stuck in the ground by a boy in uniform. A joke turned into shape, a tree that throws a shade you can't quite step out from under. Children learn early not to run under it. The sign on the gate says no artificial flowers and closes at dusk, and no one enforces either rule after the first frost. We had other rules that weren't written. Walk the inside path, not the outside. Don't say hello if you hear your name. If the wind is east and the willow is still, take the long way home. I left at 19 and came back at 36 because my mother's hip broke on the back steps when the first cold rain fell, and there was no one to carry her upstairs. The house smelled like old onions, lemon oil, and ibuprofen. I drove her to appointments and lifted the rug corners with duct tape when her walker caught and learned the pharmacist's name. 3 weeks into that new job, I walked the river road to the cemetery because I wanted to see what had stayed the same. The willow's trunk had thickened into a waist a man could not put his arms around. The lower limbs swept the grass in places, and the grass in those places didn't grow as well as it should. The soldier's cross leaned a little left, just enough to make you want to prop a shoulder against it, just enough to make the straight lines of the stones behind it look crooked. Wind wasn't moving. The willow's leaves were moving anyway. They trembled as if someone had run a hand through them on the far side. I could smell the river mud under the sweeter cut of mown grass, that cold metal smell the water keeps for itself. There were names carved into the wooden fence rails long before I was born. Half the boys I went to school with had scraped their initials alongside girlfriends they would later pretend to barely remember. I found mine. DB plus LK in a heart so shallow the winter had almost erased it. I ran my thumb over it without thinking and felt the splinters argue. When I looked up, the willow's leaves were still again, and I felt for the first time that heaviness like a room of people had taken a breath in at once. I heard a sound like paper rubbed between fingers. Not wind, lower, ground sound, a whisper. It said my father's name, not the full name. The one my mother used when she was tired of the other. Hank. The word came up from the soil beside the cross like it was being squeezed through handfuls of dirt. I took a step back and almost caught my heel under the rail. I wanted to call out that he was gone, that whatever took attendance here should check again. He had died in his chair with a baseball game on low 2 summers ago, and the only mercy in that was he got to do what old men in hats like him always promised each other they wanted, which was to go quick. He had gone quick enough to spill beer down his shirt, and for my mother to be mad about it while she dialed. Later that night she said she had dreamed a willow put its branches through the window and patted his shoulders. I told her that was the grief talking. She never mentioned it again. When the ground said his name, I put my hand to the bark of the willow and I said out loud that I heard it and it should not do that in front of me. There was a second whisper I could not make out. It went back down. I walked home with my arms tight to my body like the air had sand in it. Folklore in a small place is not a story so much as a posture everybody learns. At breakfast the next day at Marla's, in the booth with the cracked red vinyl and the coffee that tastes like it has been made by the same man for 40 years because it has, I told her I had heard something. I kept it simple. I said the willow was talking. She wiped the same spot on the counter with her towel for too long and nodded once like she was checking a box. Then she told me what she tells kids when they ask, because she knows a thing about giving shape to fear. The mothers put up the cross after the war. The willow got planted after that. There was a flood in 36 and a boy drowned under the roots and his mother said she could hear her boy's name under the mud. In 52, a boy from Korea walked home past the cemetery and people saw him next week in the paper because he gave his coat to a woman on the road and sat down in the snow and fell asleep. In 67, a man back from Vietnam put a radio under the willow and let it play all night and found the tape hiss full of voices in the morning. He drank himself to death the following winter and swore in the spring he could point to a spot on the dirt where the voice had come up, like steam through a grate. Then there was Haley. I knew a little of that because you cannot miss a girl who vanishes from a place as small as ours. I remembered flyers with a school photo where the background was too blue. 16. Brown hair to the shoulder. A bruise inside one elbow she hid with bracelets. She ran a podcast from her bedroom in an old farmhouse about local folklore and played the piano at the open mic over the feed store on Thursdays. 2 months before I came back, she had done an episode about the willow, microcassette recorder, midnight, the soldier's cross, the pillow of highway far away, one moth throwing itself at the lens of a flashlight, while she tried to sound like a person who was not actually afraid of the dark. She put the tape online. People in town said you could hear 2 names. They didn't agree on which. The county cops said she went into the river and that's why there was no note and no footprints, because the gravel there would drink a footstep the way a tired man drinks water. Her mother said Haley didn't know how to swim. People said a thing like that has nothing to do with it. A week later, the fire department pulled a broken red bicycle out of the flat water at the ferry pier that hasn't had a ferry since 58, and no one knew if it had ever been hers. The river shrugged and kept going. After breakfast, I drove the long way to the cemetery because I told myself I would not go back, and then I did. Sheriff's tape still hung in the maple like torn ribbon from when they had done that cursory show of investigation at the path. It made a sound like someone rubbing gloves together in the slight breeze. The willow didn't move until I got close. My boots sank a little. Groundwater comes up under there when the river is in a mood. Someone had left a coin on the foot of the cross, a quarter with a new year I didn't recognize because coins change under your nose when you aren't watching. The coin had sunk half its thickness into the dirt. I wiped my palm on my jeans and put my phone on voice memo and turned the screen down and stuck it in my jacket pocket because I didn't want to watch the red light while I stood there. I told myself I was going to gather proof, which is a lie you tell yourself when what you want is to give your fear a name. There is a quiet particular to graveyards that has nothing to do with respect. It is an engineered quiet. The yew hedges block the road. The stones break the wind. The caretakers cut the grass low so mice won't set up shop and invite the snakes. The quiet under the willow makes the rest sound crowded. I could hear my blood. I could hear a plane that was probably 30,000 feet up. I could hear the little click in the soldier's cross where there is a nail. That needs to be replaced and has needed it for a while, and the only reason it hasn't happened is because it holds better than anyone thinks it should. Then I heard a whisper, not across the air, up through the ground, like waterwork in winter. It said a name I did not expect. Not a soldier, not my father. The first name was Caroline. I stood there dumb with the feeling you get when you hear your name wrong in a crowded room, and the wrongness takes in the whole room and yourself with it. Caroline was my ex. She had moved to Pittsburgh because my idea of leaving had been to go 4 miles downriver, and hers had been to go be a person who ordered takeout that arrived in under an hour. We had not spoken in a long time. The voice said it a second time. Caroline. I looked around as if there were anyone else to see if I had set this up. I said out loud that this was not funny in a way that made me feel 12. Then the whisper said my name. Not yet in a way that would make me go still. Not yet the way a thing says a word when it is counting and proud of counting. It said it with a kind of questioning lift. Dan. The way a person you love asks if you're there in the next room and wants not to be alone if you are. When I got home, the memo on my phone had recorded an hour and 6 minutes of my coat fabric in the quiet. There are noises you don't hear with your own ears that microphones collect with greed. The low tremor in the dirt, the tiny scratch of something in bark, the road edge swallowing an 18-wheeler 20 minutes away. I turned the volume up and heard the whisper I had heard but flattened, less human, more mouse through a harmonica. I heard Caroline's name. I heard mine. I heard the third name and swallowed, hard at my own small apartment table because the third name was Haley, and the timestamp said nothing because the timestamp in a long strip of memos is the same dumb thing no matter what the voice inside them chooses. I went and tapped on my mother's door and asked if she needed tea. She told me to stop hovering because it made her think of my father's face and made sleep a liar. I tried to pretend this was a problem of sound. If you have ever pulled apart a blender in your sink, you know the feeling of trying to fix a machine's problem with your hands. I called my old physics teacher and asked him about sound traveling through saturated soil and whether there were culverts under the cemetery I might not know about. He told me to pour a bag of marble chips around the base of the willow because the calcium might help the tree if it had been overfed on acidic ground. He told me sound will do whatever it wants when you give it a pipe. He told me to tell my mother he still had her pie plate. I hung up and felt the hollowed-out feeling of having asked questions with the wrong shape. I put on a hoodie, grabbed a bag of crushed stone from under the steps, and went back. Old Mr. Oates was at the cemetery, sitting on one of the iron benches by the World War II monument. He had taken his army cap off and held it in both hands like a bowl, and talked to people who were not there to the right and left of him, because men who come home from wars see in 2 chairs at once. He watched me walk to the willow and did not call out because he knew if he did I would pretend not to hear. He shuffled over anyway and stood at the edge of where the grass changes and said he didn't like to see me a second day in a row with that kind of face. He served in Vietnam. He taught shop to my class and took away our rings when we wore them at the lathe. There were 3 scars like commas running up from his collar. I told him straight that the willow was saying names and I was not doing well with it. He told me, like a man living in a house with a stubborn pipe tells you to bang it with a wrench, that the willow keeps count. The mothers put up the cross and said the boys would be remembered. The remembering got rooted. It wanted to be useful. It decided remembering meant keeping the count right. The county sent boys to wars with different names in different decades, and the cross didn't care which one as long as a mother had stood there once with a ribbon in her hand. The tree, being a tree, was literal and patient. It took 3 for 1. Not because the tree is greedy. Because war is, it takes the body, it takes the man who sent him, and it takes the person who refuses to forget him. The last is often the one who heard the whisper and answered. He told me the count is never done because the memory never is. He told me this with no flair, like a man reading torque specs. Then he wheezed once and said, as if remembering he should not scare me on a weekday, that people like to stand under trees to feel smaller, and that is not always a mistake. I tried to decide that the third name on my memo meant nothing. I tried to decide that my hearing Haley was grief's echo across town. I made my mother grilled cheese. I watched a basketball game and could not keep the score in my head from one commercial to the next. I turned over the heavy things I knew and made a little arrangement of them on the kitchen table like that would make them behave. At 11:40 I put on my jacket again without admitting it to myself and walked the road to the gate. The night smelled like wood smoke and diesel both, a smell that only exists in places where men burn brush and also keep trucks running while they talk. There were 2 candles in mason jars at the gate that had been burned down until the wax defined the glass. Someone had tucked a folded program from a funeral under a rock. The willow hung its branches so close to the cross that they made a sound on it like a tall man, exhaling through his teeth. If you have ever watched a dog decide to go down the stairs in a dark house, you have some idea of what walking out under that willow feels like when you have heard your name there once already. The grass tilted wrong under my boots like there was less ground than there used to be. My hands knew what I was about to do before my head agreed. I pulled the phone, hit record, set it on the crossarm far enough from the bark that the friction wouldn't ruin the audio. I stood with my back to the tree because facing it felt like an aggression, and standing under it felt like a confession. The whisper rose like water forced through a mouth against its will. It said Caroline once, twice, then it stopped. The quiet that followed was worse than the sound. Quiet is not neutral. It can be full to the brim with attention. The third time the voice did not say Caroline. It said another name. The girl, Haley. Soft, almost happy to have gotten all the syllables right. The river made the one noise a river makes when it is trying to sound like it isn't running. I reached out and held the cross, not like prayer, like balance. The whisper came a third time after a longer pause. It said my name evenly, like a teacher taking attendance at the start of homeroom. Dan. The phone shivered on the wood like it had taken the word inside it and was having trouble with the size. My rational mind did something decently braver and tried to put an adult in the room by telling me that all of this could be collected and measured. I picked up the phone, kept the audio going, and walked home on the shoulder with the camera facing my chest, so I wouldn't be tempted to look behind me at something that would go out of its way to look like what I expected. I sat at the table and put in my earphones and listened with the volume at a level I would have made fun of any other person for using. The whisper said Caroline twice. Then it said Haley, then it said my name. And then, buried under a scrape of wind and some idiot train 2 towns over, there was a second voice I had not heard with my own ears. And that voice was mine, and I heard it at the moment the whisper said my name. And I heard it repeat my name, not soft, not helpless, not anything but functional and polite, like a man asked his name at a counter he has waited in line too long for. It was not a whisper in my chest or imagination. It was recorded. It was my breath shaping my name back into the air it had come from. I took the headphones off and sat with my hands flat on the table because I did not trust them. I watched the under-cabinet light lay a pale stripe on the linoleum. My body did not feel like a tool I could count on. I picked up my keys without meaning to, and drove to Caroline's apartment in town at an hour you only knock if someone is sick. She opened the door in a big sweater and the look on her face that used to happen before she asked me if I was okay, and whether I could be honest about the answer. I told her I just needed to see her face and confirm that she was real, and she stepped back and let me look at her hands and shoulders and the way she puts her hair into a knot when she is thinking. She said my name twice, once like an X and once like a person, and that second time I leaned against the door jamb and almost cried because hearing my name the way she meant it made the other way smaller for one breath. I told her I was sorry to bother her and that I was playing with things I didn't know how to fix. She said she had started running by the river in the mornings, and sometimes the willow smelled like hair after rain, and sometimes it smelled like coins. She told me I was not the kind of man who would ever scare her. She told me to go home and sleep for 4 hours and text her when I woke. I promised and left and broke the promise and drove to the cemetery. The act of walking under that tree the third night felt like trying to renew a contract you never had the right to sign. I had eaten nothing that would help. There is no food that helps. There are only rituals. I knelt and pressed my palm to the dirt by the soldier's cross, and I said out loud that I had heard my own mouth say my name and I needed that to stop. The whisper came up through the soil as if it had been waiting to be invited. It said Caroline once in a way that was almost kind. It said Haley once with something approaching pride. It said my name once, and the sound made my bones ache because bones know their names better than skin. My phone had stopped recording because I had forgotten to charge it. I told myself that made things better because some things should not be collectible. The ground softened under my hand like water in tire ruts. I pulled back. A willow root the thickness of my thumb showed under the thin scab of turf. It had the wet shine of something that is doing work. The root did not move exactly. It did not need to. The ground above it did, like a sheet pulled over a body. I am not a man given to dramatics. I fix things when I can, and if I cannot, I find someone else who knows how. I am telling you I tried to back away and my heel hit the low border of concrete around the base of the cross, and my other foot slid, and for one disgusting second, my wrist sank into what should have been firm earth. It was like putting my hand into a mouth that had been waiting. I yanked and left skin. Dirt under my nails turned a darker color. A sound came up from below that I could not have imagined from a tree. It was not sap, not water. It was like a name said through a chest that does not want to give it up. Lights came down the road. A truck pulled in crooked, and the high beams cut the willow into pieces. The nurse from the night shift at the clinic got out and called my name because she knew everybody, and no one slept well anymore. The light made the cross look soft, and the tree look like it was made of braided ropes. I stood up with a noise that I will forever be embarrassed by and waved and said I was fine, and wiped my hands on my jeans in a way that said I needed to believe that. She asked me if I wanted company. I said I wanted to hear her car door shut, because that would mean the actual world was present. She shut it loud enough to make a small argument with the air. We stood there with our breath-making clouds and the willow behaving itself like a child with company. She said sometimes she heard her own name in her apartment when the radiator started up. She said the voice in the ground here scared her less than the things she had heard families say in the clinic, when the phones dropped calls, and the power blinked, and it felt like the world wasn't going to behave. She said if the tree wants something, she would give it something that wasn't a person. She picked up 3 stones from the path and set them in a stack at the base of the cross. Then she said my name a 3rd time on purpose and walked back to her truck and drove away. I wanted to ask her why she said it like that, but by the time I made the question into a sentence, she was already on the road. The next day, a deputy came to the house and left a card under our door asking me to call. When I did, he asked if I had any reason to think Haley's mother might have gone to the river during the night. She had not. She had stopped by Marla's in the morning and left with coffee and a stubborn face. That evening she came to our house and sat in the kitchen because my mother had taught her how to sew when they were young, and our kitchen is where people end up when they don't know which room to cry in. She had a shoebox with rubber bands around it. Inside were the cassettes from Haley's episodes, labeled in the neat, hopeful hand a kid uses when she thinks adults will be impressed by order. There was a small plastic recorder with 1 cracked hinge. There were notes on school paper about the willow. 1 page had a list of names with tally marks. I had to sit on my hand to keep from moving one of the tallies because it itched my head the way an uneven picture itches your eye. Haley's mother said she had found the box in the bottom drawer of her desk, and she could not keep it in the house another night. She said she woke up to her own name 3 times and her dog would not come into the bedroom. She said sometimes the last kindness you can offer is to hand a thing to someone with stronger arms and say it is their turn. I listened to those tapes until my ears felt like paper. On one you can hear Haley laugh a little under her breath when she hears a stray cat knock over a can. On another she sings a few notes and stops because she remembered she was not making that kind of recording. On the one from the willow you could hear 2 names and a 3rd. The 3rd had the characteristic flattening of being replayed through someone else's chest, the way my name had been under my breath. The 3rd was her own. The timestamp did not change because machines tell time like liars tell the truth. All straight face. I played that section again and put my hand against my sternum without meaning to and felt the place my voice comes from and could not make it stay still. In the following week I avoided the cemetery like a man avoids passing his old worksite after it burned. People called me to carry furniture or fix a banister, and I said yes every time because carrying things is the 2nd oldest way to keep from thinking. The 3rd night after I stopped going, a kid on a bike slid on the loose gravel at the intersection by Marla's and broke his wrist. He stood in the road holding it with his mouth open but no sound, and his friend yelled my name because I was the nearest adult with hands. I ran and made the noises you make to kids when the world has pulled the rug and let his friend call his mother with my phone. While we waited, the kid looked up and said quietly that the willow had said his name once and he didn't tell anyone because he didn't want his mother to make him sleep in her room again like she had when the sirens had gone down for that half an hour last summer and everyone thought it meant something worse. He asked if I thought I could tell the tree to say somebody else's name so he could keep his that night I dreamed the river had been drained to its stones, and the willow's roots hung down into a trench, where men with shovels were counting and the soldier's cross had grown bark. I woke with my mouth open and the taste of mud in it and my mother calling my name from the other room, with the voice she used when I was little and had done something irreparable with scissors. I ran and found her in her nightgown with blood on her shins. She said she had dreamed she was walking under the willow in the day, and it was almost pretty, and she stepped where the ground looked smooth and the earth tilted under her like a plate and her legs had gone to sleep because she did not belong there. I cleaned her and sat on the edge of her bed and promised to keep her from places where the ground disrespects the living. She said she had heard my father's name in the dream and couldn't remember the ending, which felt like a mercy. I told her about none of this and let her talk about the price of milk like it was a safe house. I went back to the willow the next midnight because people will call that cowardice if I don't tell it correctly. I went back because when a thing knows your name, you can change towns, shave your head, leave a note for the mailman, and you will still hear it when the refrigerator kicks on. The willow did not move. The cross did not lean any more than it did last week. I said my father's name first, and it felt like a theft, and the ground said nothing. I said Caroline's name once and felt stupid and romantic in a way I had outgrown, and the ground said nothing. Then the ground said Haley before I could say anything else, and it did not sound like a warning or a hymn, and it said mine, and then it said another, and only this last will I not write in case writing a thing like that offers it forward. The third was a child's. The name hung on the air like a shirt on a nail. I stepped so hard I scuffed my heel on the concrete again, the same edge you learn the shape of by accident. I called the clinic nurse because she had put 3 stones on the base of the cross like a person paying a toll in a language she understood. She showed up in 10 minutes with her headlights cutting my shadow long across the grass and stood with me, without asking if I was drunk or sick. I told her the names. She shut her eyes and tilted her head the way she does when she is trying to remember whether the last tetanus was 10 years or 11. She said she had tried praying in winter and found it helped as long as she did not ask for anything for herself. She said we should give the tree a different kind of work, something to count that is not people. She pulled a stethoscope from her coat pocket and set the diaphragm to the trunk like she was listening for a hum, and said something under her breath I didn't catch. Then she pressed my hand to the bark and told me to keep it there, and promised the tree it would get fed and watered as long as it left the count alone tonight. I felt ridiculous and did it anyway and felt the touch of the work under my palm, slow and patient and exacting. The real life of a thing that will keep making sugar from light whether you attend or not. It did not matter. The ground said the child's name again. A coyote yipped beyond the far fence and the willow's lowest branch shifted without wind and brushed the iron of the cross with a dry sigh. People will tell you certain rituals stop fires and they do not. They let the person doing them stay human while the fire keeps being itself. The nurse put her hand on my shoulder and asked if I could hear it say the same name 3 times. I said I thought it had. She said there is a chance the count can be changed if someone else answers before the third. That this is what the old women in town believed and that they had outlived more husbands than you can count, because the world lets you carry 2 true things at once. I asked her what it means to answer. She looked at the willow with a steadiness that made me respect her more than before and said, to say your own name where the ground is, listening and mean it and hold your breath so something else cannot borrow your mouth. I stood at the base of the cross and put my heels hard into the dirt and said my name in a voice I hoped would sound like the kind of man I wished. I had been in school and at my father's funeral and in the doorway of Caroline's place. I said it once. The ground said nothing. I said it a second time and made myself keep my jaw loose so I would hear the difference if it was mine or not. The ground said the child's name a second time like it had been waiting me out. I looked at the nurse and she nodded like a coach who knows you already lost the meet, but wants you to finish because your body will remember finishing and need that later. I said my name a third time and held my breath until I saw dots. That was when I learned the last part of the rule no mother writes down. When you try to keep your breath, the ground will take it anyway by coming up. It came up under my feet like a cough under a rug. My heels sank. The cross wobbled as if appreciating the show and got steady again, because the dead expect a better standard than the living tolerate. The willow's roots showed along the edge of the turf again, and did not move while the ground above them did. My mouth opened because the body opens it when a body feels the world tilt and wants to fix the balance with air, and I heard my own voice shape the child's name with the flat exactness of a machine. It was not pleading. It was not prayer. It was the clean saying of a line on a list. That is how it gets you, not with drama. With clerical accuracy. I stumbled back and hit my shoulder on the cross, and the pain was a relief because it meant all the things that hurt had not been relocated to inside. The nurse said my name, and the strain in her voice made me hate the willow then, cleanly, in a way that did not improve anything. She pulled me toward the bench and made me sit and put my head between my knees like a mother does at a wedding. When a niece faints, she told me the count is never closed, and the only way to make peace with that is to decide what you will feed and what you will starve. She told me we can starve the tree of easy names by refusing to say them where it hears, by changing the way we keep memory, by carving them into something that does not give back like stone. She said we will fail because our mouths want to say the names that scare us, and saying them is how we feel them less for one breath, and that is what the tree waits for, that one breath. She told me to go home and wash and do something with my mother's photos, so they were not piles of paper the tree could smell. If you live in a place like mine long enough, you become part of its weather. I kept hearing the whisper the way you hear a room tone when the electricity dies. At the grocery store at noon beside the bananas. In the clinic elevator when it paused between floors. in the alley behind Marla's where the grease traps talk. The nurse put 3 stones at the cross every night for a week. Mr. Oates started coming to sit during the day with a thermos and said he was being ballast, like the old man he is. I told Caroline I had to stop calling because I could not be 2 men at once, and picking one of them humiliated me in a way I could not tolerate. She told me she had already known and was letting me be the one to say it so I could practice feeling like a person who chooses. She said my name once more and it felt like a plug pulled out of a drain, and I thanked her for loving me when I was unwatchable. There is an ending to this, and it is not a neat one. If you want ease, stop reading. If you want an honest account, this is what happened. Haley's mother hung wind chimes in a row along her porch and let them clatter through a storm. And the next morning one was missing, and the one that was missing had her daughter's school portrait paperclipped to it because she had gotten tired of sitting on her hands. The chime was found at the cemetery under the willow with the clip still on and the photo gone to pulp, and 3 names were pressed into the mud where the cross shadows fall at noon. The first 2 are names the town already knows. The third is mine. I do not know who or what pressed them. I know the shape of my own letters. The nurse came and kicked the marks with her. Shuan said the tree would have to work harder. 2 days later, the 2nd grade class came to place flags before Memorial Day and met at the gate in a line with their teacher. They carried little fabric flags with sticks like toothpicks and looked at everything like it might be the first and last time they would ever see it that big. The willow made no sound. The teacher stopped the group before the cross and showed them how to tuck the flags down, but not too far, because you want them to keep their red. I stood on the road shoulder with my arms folded, so I would not put my hands in my mouth the way a person does when he is trying not to shout. The kids went quiet in that way. Children go quiet when they feel adults paying attention to something together. The ground under the willow darkened like it had been watered. The leaves did not move. The air reached inside my mouth and borrowed my breath. I felt my tongue shape a name and closed my teeth on it and tasted iron. A girl in a blue dress looked up at the branches and held her flag to her chest with both hands. She turned once like a weather vane and then stepped forward with the clean, dumb faith of a child told to be respectful, and put her flag into the dirt at the foot of the soldier's cross. And the soil around the stick sagged and then held, and a whisper rose from the hole the stick had made with the sound of a straw pulled from a drink. The whisper said her name. It had my voice in it. That is when I understood that the willow counted differently than we do. The tree takes the breath you will not waste and uses it to balance what cannot be balanced. The cross keeps the count official while the tree keeps it alive. I am telling you this from a kitchen table with my hands flat on the formica, with the shoebox on the chair beside me, with one of Haley's tapes turning on a borrowed player because it feels rude to leave it silent. I hear my father's chair creak even though my father is gone. I hear a truck on the 2-lane drift home. I hear the river working on a bank it has worked since the first woman washed anything in it. I hear the willow's leaves against each other in a night with no wind because something underneath is moving slow. I will go to the cemetery at noon tomorrow with a hammer and new nails and fix the cross. I will say nobody's name on the way. I will stand there as ballast for the small ones. I will hold my breath when the ground leans. I will fail a little and it will hear me anyway. It always does. The last sound on Haley's tape is a girl's laugh cut off mid-breath. And if you turn the volume all the way up on a good pair of headphones and put the player on the table and lean close, you will hear, between the scrape of the willow's lowest branch on iron and the high whine of cheap tape, my own mouth whisper the name the willow needs. You will hear it clearly. It will be yours. Story number 3. I did not know the family well. That is how it often goes in a small place where there are more funerals than weddings and everybody shares the same 2 churches. They were people I nodded to outside the hardware store. A son I remembered for throwing a good fastball in American Legion. A mother who wrapped pies in foil and passed them through diner. Windows to anyone who looked like they might need the kindness. Mr. Talbot had been the last of the old men who still sharpened mower blades by hand and could tell you which birds were resigned to the rail yard after the factories closed. When he died, there were not enough shoulders in the pews to carry him without calling around. Walt from the cemetery caught me outside the diner with the quick look of a man sent on an errand he hated. He said they had 5 and needed 1 more. I had no reason to say no. I said I would be there at 1. The morning had started bright and then clouded like a face. The wind came up from the river and back down again. By noon, everything had the flat color of a photograph left in a window. The undertaker lined us at the back of the hearse and said the same things he always says. Careful steps. Watch the corners. Keep it level. Left side leads. My hand found the brass handle on my side and learned its temperature. It was colder than I expected. The weight shifted when they slid the casket out, and for an instant it felt like a living thing in my grip. The sidewalk to St. Bartholomew's has a lip that catches heels. I told myself to pay attention to that and do nothing more complicated than be straight shoulders. The bell in the tower struck once to make an announcement of the quiet it wanted. We went up the steps to the church, and the first strange thing happened on the landing. In a day with flat light, there is no reason to check your shadow. You know where it will be and that it will behave like something made from you. I glanced down anyway because the platform was narrow, and I wanted to see where my boots were. I saw my boots, my jacket, the slope of my shoulders in black on gray. Beside it, pressed to my feet like a dog, another shape held to me that was not mine. It was longer than it ought to have been in that light. It had a thicker body, the edges soft as if it had volume. The bottom edge of it was not clean. It feathered in a way that made me think of wet soil. As we turned to go inside, it turned first as if anticipating. I thought it was a trick of angle. Our procession went in. The church smelled like lemon oil and stone. We set him down on the wheeled bier, and the undertaker touched my elbow a moment, the small human thing passing through the larger formal one. The service was brief and heavy. A son spoke and got through exactly one sentence cleanly and then could not make his voice come right. People shifted in the pews with the embarrassed tenderness we adopt when someone is doing the hardest version of something that looks simple from a distance. I watched dust move in the pale windows. In the third pew, an old woman moved her lips in time with the hymn, whether or not the hymn was familiar to her. When we went out again for the short walk around the back of the church to the older section, the light had thinned further. The wind had put away its manners. We took the weight again. The handles groaned faintly in our hands, reminding us of the smallness of what wood and metal manage. I looked down at my feet as we stepped across the sidewalk seam. My shadow was where it should be. The extra shape pressed itself against my shadow like another man trying to stand in the same coat. We walked toward the open grave. It was cut neat and square like a box in a carpet. Walt stood nearby with the sod set aside in a rectangle as tidy as a napkin. At the back of the old section, the town mausoleum sits low like a stubborn animal that refused to be moved. It was a Works Progress Administration project in 1938. You can tell because the stonework is serious and self-conscious at once, and because the plaque on the door brags about acceptable things. 4 families use it, and the rest of the town pretends it is for history and not convenience. As we brought Mr. Talbot around the curve, I saw the door of the mausoleum catch the light like an eye. It is not a thing you think about until the light hits it. You see your reflection in the sky and everything that can be put on one plane at once. My extra shadow lifted a hand that was not my hand and pointed toward it. The movement was so clear that it made my knee loosen. I tightened my grip and said, "Careful." The man across from me said he had it, and I got the sense that if I mentioned the shape, he would drop his corner and let me have my own problem. We got the casket in place, and the ritual marched on as rituals do. The minister said the words. The son put a hand flat to the lid and kept it there the exact length of time a person can tolerate the feeling of touching wood over a body he loved. The pallbearers laid white carnations because the family wanted the old gestures. Wind lifted 2 petals and carried them to the edge of the excavated hole. They stuck to the clay and became something else. I tried very hard not to look at my feet again. After we lowered him and the straps came up and the first wet earth fell, I turned. The extra shadow turned a half-second ahead of me like it had been ready. It stretched across the path toward the mausoleum and thinned along the stone front like a finger, then gathered itself and stood up to my height at my shoes. It had weight without mass. The top of it licked the base of the plinth at the door and made a dark smear on the stone that stayed after the light shifted. Old Walt looked down and then up at me with a slow focus like a man trying to place the face of a boy he once coached. "You'll want to take care walking home," he said in a voice soft, enough not to disturb the family still hugging by the grave. "Don't cut across lots. Keep to the road. Dusk has its own ideas, and you do not argue with the time of day." "What do you mean, Walt?" I said. I could hear that my voice did not like me. He chewed the inside of his cheek and took his cap off and replaced it because that was the only safe thing to do with his hands. "Had one like yours after Maynard Pritchard in '97, he said. Man carried the back left. Went home with 2 shadows. Wife made him sleep in the truck. When it climbed the bedroom wall. It is not for the wife to say, though. Not her argument. The seventh pallbearer is not the one who gets chosen. He is the one who gets claimed. There were 6 of us, I said. He nodded once. There are 6 of you with hands. There is another who goes where he is pointed. There is always someone the ground notices. I am sorry it is you. It goes easier if you behave like an animal does when it realizes a fence is electric. You can touch it once. After that you go around. I nearly laughed because the sense of being lectured like a child let me pretend this was practical advice about a work site and not something older. Instead, I said thanks because that is what a person says when an old man gives him anything. I walked to my truck with my head down to keep anyone from reading my face. And the extra shadow walked with my feet so exactly. I could have believed I was not separate from it if it had not turned. Its head ahead of me at each bend in the path. My boot hit the lip of the sidewalk where it always catches a heel. I would have fallen if the undertaker had not put out a hand and pressed 2 fingers to my elbow. When I climbed into the truck and shut the door, the shadow disappeared into the cab with me and threw itself long across the passenger seat. It took up space there without weight. The seat creaked anyway. I will not pretend that the rest of that day was dramatic. That would make it sound like I am the sort of man something wants to honor with spectacle. I am a person in a small county with a job that does not matter beyond my house. I keep gutters clear. I install sump pumps. I fix loose railings and replace stops on doors when the wind keeps shutting them wrong. I drove home with the feeling of a presence trying to keep its knees from touching mine, and made a sandwich by putting turkey on bread and pretending to look for mustard when what I wanted was to keep moving my hands. I took off my shoes in the mudroom and found grit in the laces, not sand, not dust, soil, dark and wet and smelling of the black band under sod. I wiped it away with that stubbornness you reserve for things you can pretend only exist because you are slovenly. The kitchen tile had a line across it by the sink where nobody had walked. It looked like someone had drawn a level line with a muddy string. The extra shadow came off my boots and walked ahead of me into the living room before I did, turned left as if it had memorized the house, and thinned itself to point toward the front windows. The sun had started to pull away. The line to the mausoleum is straight if you cross fences, crooked if you obey property. The shadow pointed along the long, crooked way like a compass that knows more than magnetism. When the light is full, any shadow is a proper servant. It behaves and modifies itself with your movement. When the light is lazy, a shadow believes itself an equal. Mine went up the wall with what looked like intention, and climbed across the framed photograph from my sister's wedding, as if it did not respect the glass. The photograph turned darker in those places and took too long to return to normal, like it had been soaked and was drying. Adam, my dog, old and dull-eared, lifted his head from the rug and showed his teeth in a pantomime of a growl he had forgotten the real sound to. His body wanted to get up and his bones vetoed that plan. He stared at where my shadow should have been, and put his nose to the floor and sniffed at the line of soil that had bloomed, and then gotten shy again. I forgot myself, and made the mistake that lasted. I addressed it. "You are not mine," I said, like a man might speak to smoke. That is the problem in one sentence. When you say a thing is not yours to the air decides it is. It had been polite enough to act like it was following. It decided being name made it in charge. At 5:10, the street outside turned its particular dusk color, a gray made out of purple and the suggestion of old steel, the color that makes men lock their garages and go inside because they cannot see what they would be fixing. In that light, the extra shadow stood up from the floor, taller than I am by a hand, and pointed one long arm toward the cemetery. Not toward the church or the graves cut today, toward the mausoleum. It kept that exaggerated posture until the light pulled all the way down and gave up. You can put off something like that once, maybe twice. You do that, and your sleep turns into a trick you can feel yourself failing. In the morning, I woke to dirt in the sheets at the foot of the bed like a man had climbed in with his boots on. There was a line along the wall under the window where the paint had darkened as if someone had dragged a wet sack. In the bathroom, the mirror was fogged in a pattern. Not a handprint. As if a not-quite body had leaned too close, a shape of absence within absence. I shaved anyway because men shave in the face of worse. At 11 a.m., the neighbor kid threw a baseball against my siding and Adam barked for real. Then the bark ran out of him and he made the sound old animals make when they realize they cannot do the job anymore. When I opened the door, the extra shadow shoved itself out around my legs into the sun and made no apology to the light. This was the thing the world had stopped warning me about. It did not need the rules we put on darkness. It stood plainly at my feet in noon brightness and pointed across the street, across the field, toward the low, pale shape of stone under the hill where the mausoleum sits. I went back to find Walt because kindness is sometimes the same as knowledge. He was at the cemetery office with 2 maps unfolded like quilts. He looked up at me and nodded at a chair and put a cup of coffee in front of me without asking if it would be too late for me to sleep if I drank it. I told him the shadow had followed me home, that it had pointed, that it did not wait for dusk. He made a small gesture with his mouth and nodded again like his head had gotten used to being an index card, on which other people's fear was written. He said the story he had hinted at, then refined it because I needed it to be more than a shape. The 7th is a tradition nobody asks to keep. 6 men carry, and in hard winters sometimes 4, and the ground chooses one more to mind the other side. The chosen man is not always the strongest or the kindest. Sometimes he is the one who thought of something uncharitable as he carried, and the ground likes knowing where people put their small meannesses. Sometimes he is the one who saw the polished top of the casket and pictured himself. Sometimes he is simply the nearest. The shadow is not a separate creature. It is a task. It is dirt remembering the pressure of a man too early. You did nothing wrong. You are a place that could hold a weight. The mausoleum draws those tasks the way a magnet draws filings because it is a house for unfinished chores. When families switch from vault to wall, they tell themselves they are honoring. They might be. They also might be storing what is too heavy to lift. "What do I do?" I said. He ran his finger along the map that showed the old section and the rise up to the door that always sticks if there has been a wet spring. The old gravediggers used to tilt their hats and say a man should not step through with his own feet, he said. If he has to go, better he ride. A cart, a tractor seat, a backhoe bucket, anything with wheels or teeth. Never your feet. Never let your own shadow lay across the threshold with you, not if there is an extra one in the bargain. One man I watched took a mirror and walked backward. That worked until the mirror showed him what he looked like doing that, and he dropped it and cut his boot and went in with blood on his heel. It went sideways from there. Talk to the caretaker if you must. Do not go at dusk. Dusk belongs to the project that is not ours. I went at dusk. I am not making myself heroic when I admit that. I could not help it. When the sun dropped to that place where a field looks like a strange ocean, and the crows go single file toward whatever trees still tolerate them, the shadow rose from wherever it had hidden in my house and stiffened to point. It turned each corner before I got there. It stopped at the end of the street and did not cross until I did. At the fence, it slipped between rails like it knew where its mass ended. Up the hill, it took the long way because it knew men had placed stones in the short grass where they do not like feet. At the door of the mausoleum, it broadened and stood like a doorman with bad intentions. The plaque was cool under my fingers. The door was unlocked. Inside is a cool, hard smell that never leaves your clothes if you stand there too long. Lime and old roses and the coppery place where water has learned to stain. The caretaker had left the lights on low. There is a main hall with niches to the left and right, and a triangle of steps up to a wider room where the rich families used to put their best names behind glass. I could hear water somewhere behaving in a way pipes do when they are not being supervised. The extra shadow slipped away from my feet and went along the wall like poured ink. It touched each glass plate with a slow finger. It left a smear on them that I could not wipe even when I used my shirt hem. It pulled at the far right niche and lifted a hand and pointed down at the floor. The tile there has a pattern you do not notice unless you crawl. Overlapping circles. A flower that makes itself from an idea of geometry and never an actual plant. One of the circles had a hairline crack through it that looked like someone had drawn on it with a pencil. The crack widened in the light with a tiny sound, a noise between a tick and a breath. A piece of tile shifted. I put my hand on it because you cannot help yourself from putting your hand on the less stable thing. The tile tilted. The sound that comes from a mechanism that has not been moved in decades is a tired joy. I lifted the piece and set it aside. There was flat metal under it with 2 finger rings. My extra shadow rushed into the gap before there was a gap and then waited there like a dog at a hole he had sent in. If there is a moment in a person's life when he has not yet become the version of himself who is about to do the stupid exact thing, I wanted that moment to happen then. I wanted a stranger to walk through the door and comment loudly on the weather. I wanted my phone to ring and tell me my mother had fallen and needed help. I wanted the caretaker to come in with his bad key and ask me what I thought I was doing. None of that happened. I put my fingers in the rings and pulled. The panel came up with a wet sound and a grunt of old grease. A breath of air came out that had been waiting to be released for longer than a person waits for anything. It made my hair feel different. Stairs ran down. The shadow poured itself forward as if gravity knew it well. I went down 6 steps and the door above me moved a fraction. It did not swing shut with drama. It protested tiredly and began to settle like a book you pushed near the edge of a table. The room under the mausoleum felt like a practical joke played by the dead on the living. It was bare and square and had racks built into the walls for tools that were not there. The far wall had plaques with names and dates cut into them. 4 to a row, 3 rows, most of them already claimed. There was a blank space at the bottom right with the metal holes drilled where another plaque was meant to go. I know the weight of silence when it is looking at me. I turned and looked at the back of the door at the underside of the panel I had lifted. It had a number written on it in grease pencil that matched the number on the box at the foot of the stairs. The box held brushes and a small brass hammer and a bag of cement that had taken water and become an object as useless as a dream. On the workbench there was a single new plaque covered with brown paper. It had a tag on it. The tag had my last name spelled correctly when everyone in town usually misses the second consonant. The paper had a crease where someone had traced the letter D with a fingernail before stopping, because he had scared himself. I went up 2 steps and put both hands to the metal door and pushed. It did not move enough for me to imagine I was strong. I spoke then, and the sound came back to me a second later because of the hard surfaces and the way fear walks out of its room slowly when called. I called for Walt. I called for the caretaker by his first name, though I had never earned it. I called for Adam, though I knew my dog would never be able to do a thing here. The shadow came to the second step and stood beside my boots. For the first time since I had seen it, I saw it turn its head toward me. It had no face, but it has posture. I felt its attention. It lifted its arm, no longer a black shape, an absence with edges, and it pointed at the blank space on the wall where a plaque would go. It kept its finger there until my shoulder. Muscles began to shake and my breath shortened because my body had decided to panic without consulting me. Above me there was a sound like someone moving furniture in a distant apartment. The mausoleum door groaned open. A footstep. 2. The cautious cadence of a man retracing a path he does not like but has learned. A figure came down 3 of the stairs and leaned into the light that barely made it around the corner. It was the caretaker, Hinshaw, short and round-bellied with the eyes of someone who has had to call families with bad news enough times that he learned where to put his gaze. He looked at the plaque on the bench without asking what it was. He looked at the shadow without letting his eyes settle. He looked at me the way a surgeon looks at a man who will not wake up and he has done everything he should have done, and there is not going to be a speech to fix it. "I thought you might come," he said. "Walt asked me to leave the door for you. I told him it is not my way to help an argument that is already fixed, but he said he owed you because you did him a favor with his cousin last spring, and it is hard to refuse a man when he lays a debt in your hand." "I want you to open the door," I said. I reached up and pushed again to prove I was not babbling. He nodded and did not move. "I can push with you," he said. "It will come an inch, too. Then it will settle again because it does not weigh what it looks like it weighs. It weighs like one of those muted things in a church where everyone knows a word they will not say. I can get you out if the door wants to be open. If it does not, a man could pull until his hands are chalk and it will not. I have a phone upstairs and a list of numbers, and one of them is the one for the man who can bring a jack. Because that is how you feel better. You make a list and call men. I will do that for you if that is what you want." "That is what I want," I said because he had offered the words and I needed to hold them. He stood there with one hand on the wall and one on the rail like a person who had learned where to stand to keep his body from aching. He did not move to go. "You carried for Talbot," he said. He asked for the wall. The family said no. It is a matter of money in the church and how many generations think boxes are cheap and bricks are dear. The count is wrong now. The wrong place in the right building. Something owed got tall. "You sound like Walt," I said. "I sound like a man in a job he did not ask for who learned how to speak in a way that does not make women slap his face when he tells them where they have to leave a person for a while," he said. He took 1 step down and reached into the shadow. His hand went into the dark as if into water. It came out with dirt on it to the wrist. He wiped it on his pants and looked at the streak like one looks at paint after a bad decision. "The 7th is a shape, not a person," he said. "The shape will have you until it finishes pointing. Sometimes pointing needs a man to act a part. Sometimes it only wants you to come down the stairs and see your name on paper and go home and stop saying it. Then it finds another man and you live. Sometimes it wants your weight where a weight is missing. There were 6 niches set aside on the right, here for that family, and the wives said the men should have the wall, and the sons said they would be in the ground because that is what you do when you have a back hole and want to prove it. There were 5 in the wall. The 6th is empty. Your shadow thinks the count should be right. I am not a Talbot, I said. My mouth made it sound like a reasonable point. Names are habits, he said. Counting is older. Men like words more. Dirt likes numbers. He came down 2 more steps and stood in front of me. He put his hand lightly on my shoulder, and for a second I thought I would put my head down on his hand like a bird under a palm. I will go get the jack, he said. I will call Walt so he can pretend he is helpful. I will call your mother if you want me to, though she will tell me to bring you home for supper, which is not a phone call any man wants to finish if he cannot make it true. You wait with the thing that came with you and do not finish the job for it by helping. Do not pick up the brush. Do not unwrap the plaque. Do not knock the pins from the last blank. I mean this politely, and I mean it twice. He turned and went up. The shadow stood beside me and did not move. I breathed like a man counting to 10 and forgetting whether he is supposed to go back down to 1. The air in that room had the taste of batteries. I looked at the plaque because you cannot not look at the name that calls you. The paper had loosened a little at one corner. The urge to peel and check whether they had spelled it right is the same urge that makes you pick at a scab. I put both hands on my knees and told them to be heavy. I thought about the rule a man once told me about rifles. Keep your hands where you can see them when you are scared, and do not touch anything until the fear burns down. Above me the door moved again, a softer sound now. I heard men talking. I heard metal on stone. I heard the jack wind its ratchet. The panel lifted a 1/4 inch. It fell and thudded like an answer. The shadow touched my ankle then. It was not a touch like a finger. It was pressure along the bone as if the darkness was thick enough to lie on. I barked a sound I will never call a word and kicked. It held. It moved up my leg the way water climbs a cloth. The plaques on the wall made the same single sad sound small bells in old churches make when the building settles. I tried to stand, and the pressure kept me at the height of a man tying his shoe. I reached out to the bench to pull myself up, and my palm hit the paper and tore it. You cannot lie to yourself when your name is cut into metal. It is not a loving font or a whimsical one. It is letters hammered into dignity. Mine was there in black. The dateline had only the year and a dash. Hinshaw called down my name the way a person calls a dog to keep it from going into the street. The shadow released my leg in that instant with a mockery of kindness and slid under my hand to the cement bag. It pressed itself to the corner until powder lifted in the air and made a ghost of the thing. We are not allowed to say is a ghost. I put my hands under the edge of the panel and lifted, because that is what a person does in a room when the door will not let him. It did not move. It will move, I told myself, when men lean. It will move if you become a man who is heavier. I screamed then and did not recognize my voice. Above me the jack squealed and the metal ground and something cracked in the stone that made a new sound I will know in my sleep. The panel came up 1 inch, 2. Light came through like it had been manufactured for me and not for the dead. The shadow flowed up and hit the light and turned thin and then made a decision and went past the edge and took form in the hall, and I watched it go because I had to know whether it would turn. It did. It turned the corner before it got to it. It headed for the door of the mausoleum because dusk had tightened itself around the building like a belt. It was free to be what it was in the hour it belongs. 2 I pushed and Hinshaw pulled, and a 3rd man put his shoulder to the slab, and we got it high enough for a man to crawl, and Hinshaw hissed, "Go like a boy who knows the principal is in the hall." I went to my belly and wriggled and got my chest into the light, and my hips stayed. Something held there that was not stone and did not care that I would break if it used the right kind of force. I felt hands on my collar. I felt the weight of 2 men trying to make me into a thing that slides. The shadow, my extra, stood just beyond the door to the hall and looked back. It lifted its arm as if helping with the count. It pointed down the length of the hall toward the niches. It was not pointing at mine. It was pointing at the empty 6th on the right. Dirt clung to the edge of the glass there where fingers had waited and did not become fingers. It pointed and kept pointing, and dusk settled. Further, and my ribs stung in wood. In my chest hurt that had never been installed, and I understood, finally, what the old men mean when they say a job is claimed. The thing that held my hips let me move exactly enough to make me think I had done it. I turned and put one hand back down and touched the cool edge of the bench and the other on the floor where my name sat ready on the metal. And I said my name the way a man says it in court, clear and firm and as if he believes in himself. The shadow answered from the hall in my voice and kept pointing. And in that answer was the exact weight of the place beneath me where I was meant to be. And Hinshaw's hand slid on my collar because sweat is a traitor, and the panel dropped a little, just enough to make the breath go out of the room. And the last thing I saw before light cut, lower, was my shadow in the hall. Turn the corner, toward outside again without me. Now if you drive by at dusk you will see 6 shadows slant across the mausoleum face even, when there are only 2 men standing there talking about the small plans. One is long and thicker than it should be. It turns corners ahead of the men when they move, and it always points to the 6th niche on the right before the light goes. On certain nights you will hear, if you lean on the door and risk your ear, a voice calling a name that is probably not yours. You will want to answer because that is how you are made. Do not. If you want to be kind in the old way, put your shoulder where the hinges lift and lend your weight to what you do not see. I am below, with the useful tools and the cement gone bad and the plaque with my name waiting its last little line. I am below with the job of counting done for me. Upstairs my shadow moves without me, and it will turn the corner before you do. And it will show you where to go, and if you let it, it will teach you how to be claimed. Now when dusk leans on the mausoleum, 6 shadows slide across the stone and one moves without a man. If you visit, you might feel a weight at your hips, a tug where your name belongs, and the door breathing like a patient. Don't say your name. Don't help count. If a finger of darkness points, walk away before it turns the corner for you. Before you go, tell me, would you carry the 7th? Drop your answer in the comments. Share this with someone who'd never step inside after dark and subscribe for the next story. Keep your light close.